Okay, in this last video we're going to look at the peripheral nervous system, some details, but then also start kind of tying things together, things that we've talked about, that you've seen in other videos, including the central nervous system, nerves, the impulses, the action potentials that we discussed, and how those get processed by the nervous system. And so let's begin with the peripheral nervous system, which of course is basically everything but the brain and spinal cord, which includes quite a bit of nerve tissue. I wouldn't be able to say how much, but you can imagine all the nervous tissue going throughout your body from the spinal cord branching out everywhere, all the way out to your fingers and toes. There's two divisions of the peripheral nervous system, so PNS for short. The somatic, which includes the voluntary effectors. These are motor neurons that would be connected to your skeletal muscle. And then the autonomic division, which would be the involuntary effectors. These would be motor neurons of something like your digestive system. So to break down the autonomic nervous system, and again this is happening automatically, subconsciously. Examples are digestion, your heart rate, and your hormones. Of ways you can apply this to your body. Some things we've kind of already talked about. Some things we will talk in a little bit more detail later on this year when we talk about hormones, how these work. So basically there's these clusters of nerves called ganglia, and we'll see this in the spinal cord too, in the peripheral nervous system that help control the organs. And this diagram kind of gives you a cheap picture of kind of where certain parts of the nervous system are controlling different parts of your body, digestive system and other things. And basically the job of the ganglia are to receive, process, and send information to all of these organs. Basically, like I said, mostly your digestive system, but we have a reproductive system, we have respiratory, cardiovascular system, and so these things that are not directly controlled by the central nervous system, or not as directly controlled by the central nervous system. There's two parts to the autonomic nervous system, so this is starting to get kind of confusing. Peripheral nervous system has two parts, somatic and autonomic. The autonomic has two parts, sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic division, if you think of high energy situations, a fight or flight response. High energy situations for sympathetic division. The parasympathetic division would just be kind of ordinary at rest conditions. For the autonomic nervous system, all the fibers are motor neurons. The reflex centers, which we'll talk a little bit about that, in the brain receive impulses from sensory nerve fibers. So sensory nerve fibers are different than motor nerve fibers. The sensory nerve fibers are using the autonomic nervous system pathways to stimulate effectors in response. In other words, stepping on a nail or something to initiate a response. An example here that I've given you, the vagus nerve sending a message to the hypothalamus that the heart rate is too high, and then the hypothalamus stimulating parasympathetic nervous system to decrease the heart rate. And then to connect the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system, obviously we're talking about spinal nerves. I'm not going to ask you any of these details, but just keep in mind basically the significance of these spinal nerves, and that is to send and receive information to and from the brain, to and from the rest of the spinal cord, to and from the rest of the body. Each nerve has two roots. They are the dorsal and ventral, or dorsal and anterior roots. And you can see this picture here, a little bit small in yours. The anterior horns are here. Anterior meaning the front. The posterior horns are down here. There are also clumps of nerves here in the spinal cord, or just outside the spinal cord, called ganglia here on each side. These are the dorsal root ganglion, or ganglia plural. These are really important in spinal cord function and receiving information that details of which we're not going to get to too much. Processing those action potentials that are coming in that we talked about, generated in videos a couple of videos ago. The processing of those action potentials is dependent on how the nervous system is organized, and so you can see a diagram here that you should be familiar with some of these things, but difference here being auditory impulses, visual impulses, olfactory impulses, and other things entering the brain. These neuronal pools are just groups of neurons in the CNS that are that basically connect each other and perform a common function. Each pool receives and sends signals from other pools, and so you can imagine how visual impulses, olfactory impulses, auditory impulses would be working in conjunction with something like the memory, storing memories, or creating short-term memories and then eventually storing them into long-term memories. And going back to these neuronal pools, neurons in the pool are going to receive excitatory or inhibitory impulses, just like we saw in the chemical synapse, the excitatory neurotransmitters and inhibitory neurotransmitters, either causing something to take place or continuing the transmission or preventing transmission. And a lot of times this is a problem with people that have things like depression and disorders, mental disorders. So again, we're talking about threshold, reaching that threshold stimulus or not. Something that would be considered not reaching the threshold stimulus would be considered subthreshold. Facilitation, here's another vocab word. Facilitation is the subthreshold impulse makes the neuron more excitable for the next stimulation. So it's not necessarily creating an action potential, but it's just allowing for that impulse, or so allowing for the neuron to be more excitable so the next time it comes around, perhaps causing the action potential to take place, perhaps reaching the threshold stimulus. Two different forms of basically processing the information. Convergence is two nerves converging, coming onto their axons are coming onto one nerve. So this can allow for facilitation. Again, that perhaps allowing for more excitable response for the action potential to take place. And this is for different types of information at the same time, such as pain and heat. If you consider touching something, a hot stove, you're going to be sending pain signals and also heat signals, extreme hot signals. Divergence is just the opposite, one nerve axon branching off and contacting two different nerve cells. And so stimulating more than one neuron, and this allows for amplification of a signal. Example here that I've given you is contraction of all muscle fibers at the same time. So as these guys branch off to more nerves, and these nerves branch off to more muscle fibers, contacting more muscle fibers down here, branching off themselves to more parts on the muscle fiber. To go back to a lab that we did, and that was the reflex lab, a bunch of activities that you did. This is a very interesting topic. The reflex arc that I had you look up is basically rerouting the signal from stretching out, say for the patellar reflex, stretching out the tendon, stretching out the muscle. That signal gets sent to the spinal cord and then comes right back to the muscle to cause it to contract and allow that foot to be kicked out, and that's the knee-jerk reflex that you did, the patellar reflex that you did in the lab. So there will be a sensory receptor to receive the information. It's going to go up into the central nervous system at what's called a reflex center, and then that nervous impulse is going to travel through an interneuron, which is just between, and go straight back to the motor neuron, to the leg, and cause that knee jerk to take place. So here's kind of a better look at how that works. And this is something that you already did in the lab, so Should make more sense now that you look at the pictures. Here's the zoomed in picture so you can get a better view, and this is one you have on your slide. So the information comes in and then gets sent up to the spinal cord. It's going to contact an interneuron right here in purple and get sent back to that muscle to contract, and that's causing the foot to, in this case, raise up for the patellar reflex. There's also a withdrawal reflex, which is if you were to, the example here is stepping on a nail. So again, that pain signal gets sent to the central nervous system, interneuron, reflex center, information gets sent directly back to the muscles that would be in charge of causing that leg to pull away from the stimulus, and in this case, something sharp, which is going to basically cause you some pain. And 2 slides that I just realized, as I'm going back through the notes, I didn't want to make everything worse, but these belong back up in the brain stuff, and we already talked about this. Your motor control is from the opposite side of the brain. Continuing with this spinal cord theme, there are spinal nerves, dorsal and ventral roots coming out of the spinal cord. This would be the transverse section of your spinal cord. And the spinal nerves are divided into two pairs, and they are these guys here, dorsal and ventral roots. And then eventually these branch off, connect to form plexi or a plexus. There are multiple plexi in your body, where basically all the nerve fibers are meeting in a particular area that are basically have some similar function. Example of that would be one example would be the cervical plexus. This is the muscles of the neck, and the phrenic nerve, which is going through that cervical plexus. This is motor impulses to the diaphragm, and then also the another example is the brachial plexus. This is the muscles of the arm, forearm, and hand. Here's one nerve that you probably have already looked up since you did the reflex lab, the median nerve, which is supplying innervation to the arm, upper arm, and lower arm, and forearm. And then finally the lumbrosacral plexus, which is down towards the bottom, the lower limbs and body parts down there. Major nerves here, femoral nerve, sciatic nerve. Sometimes you hear people complaining of their pain on the back portion of their leg. It would be because of the sciatic nerve running down to something like the gastrocnemius muscle. And that wraps up all of the videos of the nervous system.